All right, fellas, we are down one album, and now we are going to do review number 2, and it is actually the second album that we're going to cover from this band and the second album in their canon, and it is The Clash, and we are going to do Give 'Em Enough Rope, which was released the year after an album we previously covered in long form, the Clash debut album, which was self-titled. And so, Matt, before we kick it over to you to start the segment, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers?
Well, the numbers are 268 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, and number 22 in the year 1978, and number 1,258 of all time. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and it is the Clash's 5th highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Yeah, so...
let me try to guess. Okay, so probably London Calling is they're going to be their one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'm just going not necessarily my favorite. I'm going to go with what I think the rankings are. Self-titled's probably number 2.
Yep.
Probably Combat Rock is number 3.
Number 4.
4. Okay, so Sandinista number 3.
It is, yes.
Wow, okay. All right. So
and I don't know, depending on how things turn out, right now we are not scheduled to cover Sandinista in a proper episode because it's 104 in the 1980s.
We are going to cover them in a bonus episode, though, because they are in the Rolling Stone countdown. I don't think we're slated to cover Combat Rock, though, which is a shame.
Yeah, Sandinista is going to take us about 3 weeks to listen to.
Yeah, it's long. And I don't think anybody wants to pretend that Cut the Crap, I believe, was their last album. I think we'd all like to pretend that one doesn't exist.
That's ranked number 6. And number 1,680 in the 1980s.
In fairness, Matt, they only have 6 studio albums, so something had to be number 6.
Well, something has to be last, right? Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on number 5?
It's actually, I think Josh goes next.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. Well, I'm glad we listened to this, in order after the debut album, because I really like this album. I hadn't heard it before, and it felt like they've already, even though it's only been a year, they've matured a lot. They still have all of the foundational aspects of what make them a great band. It's still a very political album. That's apparent just in the titles alone of the songs. But they feel more refined, more polished. It feels like their energy is more like reined in a good way, or like channeled aggressively and in an interesting, powerful way. And the same with their anger. I feel like it's very focused on certain things, and as a result, the music itself is it just feels like a more polished, refined album to me. I liked all of the songs. I feel like they still harken to their like punk rock roots. They have these really good drum beats, and the melodies feel more complex as well in the songs, and they have just more. They feel more confident in what they're talking about. They're talking about drugs in London a lot. They're talking about gangs, English, like unrest in some level. They even use on the song English Civil War. They go to like the ants go marching one by one. They take a riff from that song and incorporate it into the song. And as a result, all of this like coheres into a really catchy, fun album that also is sharp and incisive. There wasn't any necessarily like earworms that got in my head, but every song that came on, I was enjoying listening to it, and I feel like they kind of leveled up listening to this album. I mean.
Yeah, so you liked it better, Josh? Is that what you're saying?
I think I liked it better.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have always liked this album more than The Consensus, for sure, and I think you guys know how I feel about The Clash. I love The Clash.
Mm-hmm. You do?
Yes. I've always thought this album was underrated. If I were to make a top 10 Clash songs of all time, all the Young Punks, New Boots, and Contracts would be in it. I think it's an awesome way to end the album. I think it's interesting when you look at the track listings. The 2 long songs, Last Gang in Town and All the Young Punks, are the enders on both sides of it, and they kind of fit perfectly. This is that era of late 70s Britain. is huge in this period, in the sense that so much of the music that we're going to be covering in the next 3 months is going to come from that area, throughout, not just one area of Britain, like all in that pre-Margaret Thatcher, inflation, all kinds of volatility era. And it's, whether it be the punk we covered in the Sex Pistols, whether it be, what the Clash are doing, whether it be the two-tone stuff we do later, there's just all kinds of stuff that is in this era, and also kicks, Elvis Costello was, around in this area. And there's all kinds of stuff that also leads to like other stuff in the early 80s that's a continuation and evolution of sounds. It's a new era, because if you notice, the people like the David Bowies and the Mick Jaggers and the John Lennons, they're not in England anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're in different places. And this is very much like the England that comes afterwards from a contextual standpoint. Like you, Josh, I think that they, when people talk about the Clash, they often talk about how they dabble in different genres, right? But in the first Clash album, they don't really dabble in as many genres as they do later, right? It's pretty straight ahead. This is the album where they start dabbling in some different genres. They start, I think, getting a little bit away from sort of the Ramone style repetitive punk, and more into better bridges, more nuanced choruses. The guitar work, I don't know if you guys noticed, is clearly better on this album than the first one. Without a doubt. The bass that's played by Paul Simonon is really basic, and I don't know if it would travel everywhere, but in the context of the Clash, I always felt like his bass really works. I am totally open to folks that can't get past either Joe Strummer or Mick Jones's voice. I'm not bothered by it. I do know some people that they find it, to be repetitive or grating, but boy, I don't find it that way. And this is the first album with Topper Hedden on drums too. And he has a little bit different sound than what was on their first album too. So yeah, I really like this one. It's another album I'd strongly recommend. I think it gets better as it goes along. I know there's some people that like the first side of this album better than side 2. I think one day I went through some of my favorite bands and was curious about like what like All Music would think and stuff. And I seem to remember that review saying the first half is good, but then it kind of loses steam. I actually feel the exact opposite about it. I feel the second half of it is where it really begins to get another level up. And the lyrics, like Josh said, are great. I mean, Julie's been working for the Drug Squad. I know in the British version is Julie's in the Drug Squad, because there's two different there's two different versions of this album that are there, as there were with both of the first two Clash albums. But yeah, English Civil War is a contemporary piece. Tommy Gunn, I think always has one of those like, great Clash choruses that, it's a chorus in the chorus and it's a chorus in the verses leading up to the chorus, the Tommy Gunn, it leading up to that. And it's a volatile album, but the Clash are a volatile band, and that's why I love them so much. They bring a certain energy that's hard to replicate.
Yeah, I appreciate that energy.
And they're only going to get better too. So spoiler alert, London Calling's pretty good. So
that's what I was going to ask you, John. How would you rank this in their canon?
I have always thought Combat Rock and Give 'Em Enough Rope are underrated. I always had an appreciation for the first album, but basically in contrast to their growth. So if you listen to it in isolation, like we did for the first one, I think it falls to 4 for me. On that. Sandinista is very hard because there's a great, I mean, I don't want to give too much of my take away, and I want to listen to these a different way. But yeah, my take has always been Sandinista is a great 1-disc album, a pretty good 2-disc album, and very unwieldy as a 3-disc. It's almost like an art project as a 3-disc album. And London Calling, I love, but I don't look at London Calling as so far ahead of the rest of their canon that it's like their pinnacle work. I've never bought into that. To me, the Clash is the totality of their first 5 albums. I think you have to, like, I don't pull individual albums out necessarily. I look at them, their growth, their evolution, and the Clash are the rare band that I think are both an album band and a singles band, which is hard to do. And really, when you think about bands that are that, it's like the big ones, right? The Beatles and, bands like that have all of these different things. And the Clash, to me, and we haven't even really gotten into like the breakthrough, Clash stuff that crosses over, yet.
Right.
That's all to come. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
How about you, Matt? What do you think?
So I didn't know any of these songs.
Really? Not even one?
Not a single song on
Wow.
this record. And I'm just realizing, I think I just know London Calling and maybe like Rock the Casbah or whatever, like the singles that came out from the 80s.
Those are the most recognizable songs probably, if you ask me.
Yeah, and I just...
Well, Should I Stay or Should I Go is a pretty damn...
Right, I know that one too. Yeah. Right, stuff like that. So, I didn't know any of this. I thought I would know at least one, and I didn't. But I really liked this. To me, this is not as much as of a punk album as like a almost in a back to basics 50s rockabilly, blues rock style that I'm hearing here more so. I think that's really the foundation of this record. And obviously the blues are a foundation of most rock and roll, but that was sticking out to me more, just the way that the guitars are playing, the way that the bass was playing, the drums, just the whole interplay there. There's definitely punk elements, and I think probably the sound that I'm getting the most punk sound out of is Joe Strummer's voice.
Yep.
So, other than that, this seemed to be more of just like maybe a more edgy type of 50s rockabilly type album for a lot of the songs. I mean, not across the board, of course, but I think that was my main takeaway, is kind of just how it was a little bit more of a back to basics type of sound that I was getting. Very consistent across the board, very catchy, very melodic. The bass lines, you were talking about the bass and the guitar, John. I think that the bass and the guitar really played well against each other. There's a couple of places where there was like some really good, bass lines, like McCartney-esque kind of bass lines with a guitar, like a melodic guitar going to the background of it. Like The Last Gang in Town, I think that was the first one that kind of really stood out like that. I really thought what they were doing there was really, really great. And then on Guns on the Roof, I'm sitting there going, I've heard this guitar riff before. And did either of you pick up on that? Because it's a very familiar guitar riff.
I don't know if I do.
And I'm going, I don't know what it is. And halfway through, I'm like, it's I Can't Explain by The Who. And then I had to look it up. And yes, it's the same guitar riff from I Can't Explain. The dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
So I definitely picked up on that, which I was like,
well, the Clash were deeply inspired by The Who, mod culture. And I mean, the Clash are no more a punk band than they are a pop band, a mod band, a reggae band. They're kind of like
hodgepodge.
They are, and I think they get thrown in with punk, but outside of certain elements, and we'll see it even more, right? They don't fit in that window.
No. So that I thought that was kind of that was kind of interesting. So I really liked it, and I'm just like throughout the whole thing, and I'm like, it was a very quick, easy listen. Didn't take a whole lot for me to really get into it, and I like, and I don't know who doesn't like Joe Strummer's voice. I think he's got an awesome rock voice. That was actually one of my notes, that I love the sound of it, the energy, the passion, the anger, but it's also. It can also hold the tune. It's not just like a screaming for the sake of screaming. He's got just a great rock and roll voice, and I think he sings on most of it. The one song that I found, it was "Stay Free." I'm like, that's not Joe Strummer. It was a much more clean. It was a clean. That must have been Mick Jones or somebody else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
he's only lead vocals is on "Stay Free."
Right. Yeah. So it's clear that was like a more polished vocal part that was going on there. So,
well, you'll hear him a lot more on you heard him a lot more on the first album, and you'll hear him a lot more on London Calling. But he's usually doing the choruses that are kind of like the when you hear those backies, that's more the Mick Jones sound.
Yeah, and there's a lot of call and response. There's a lot of background vocals that kind of do pay homage to like the 50s doo-wop kind of sound. So I was a little taken back by that. I thought that was kind of interesting that, and I don't know, I just one listen, but that's kind of what I picked up on. So the production also, it seemed a little bit cleaner too, like a cleaner, more polished production.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Josh, you're saying maybe it's more mature, more focused, perhaps. It's definitely, it might be a little bit more focused in terms of the production. Maybe there was a little bit more of an intent to clean a couple of things up. I like it either way. I don't think either one's better than the other, but I really liked this. This was a very easy, fun listen from top to bottom, and I'm a big thumbs up on it. I'm excited to listen to more Clash. I really only knew, like I said, London Calling. So these are two records that I've really enjoyed. So thumbs up.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll give you one tidbit from this and a little bit of the research I did after listen. Here we go. From a various amount of places. Here's some info. During recording of the album, Joe Strummer's trademark Telecaster guitar needed to be taken in for repairs, so he played a hired semi-hollow Gibson ES 345 for most of the sessions. Sandy Pearlman, who produced the original album, was not a big fan of Joe Strummer's voice, to the point that he ensured the drums were mixed louder than the lead singer's vocals on the entire album.
Huh.
So I also love Joe Strummer's voice, but there you go. That's an example of someone who... There aren't more people like it than don't, but there are a not totally quiet minority of people that are bothered by his voice.
I never heard that before.
Yeah, that's surprising to me. It doesn't seem like he's got, for rock and roll and punk, it doesn't seem like he's got this voice that's just like, oh my God. It's not like it's a Geddy Lee where it's like this, or like a Billy Corgan, or something like that you can kind of see, man, it's really it's piercing, or it's kind of it's raspy, but it's I don't see it being that offensive.
And I noticed the drums way more on this like this and all other Clash albums more than on the first, but I always had attributed that more to like Topper Head and style. But when I read that and then I went back and listened to it, but with the context of hearing that, you do kind of see that the drums are mixed I mean, they're not mixed at the forefront like, the Who, right? But they are mixed a little bit in the forefront more than you would think, if you really have a discerning eye. So it's worth the listen if you ever listen to it a second time.
Kind of weird that a producer wouldn't like a lead singer's voice. Why not just not produce the album?
Go somewhere else.
If you don't like the band.
Yeah, well, Sandy Pearlman we've talked about Sandy Pearlman before. Do you remember we talked about him?
No.
Our guys, the Blue Oyster Cult. Sandy Pearlman was basically integral in terms of them being in it. So when I saw his name, I was like, oh, there's a little bit of a throwback. And Blue Oyster Cult and The Clash are very different vibes. So that kind of makes sense.
We're getting to the point in this podcast where like just single name drops here or there are not. I'm not retaining them.
That is true. You're usually the person who does that to me, Matt. It's like, have you ever heard of this guy before? Heard like the Jay Leno thing? Like, have you heard this? I mean, yeah. Like, so I figured I'd do one along the way, so there you go.
Yeah, I'll try to remember that. Sandy Pearlman. I'm sure that Sandy Pearlman will come up some other time at some point.
Don't fear the Reaper, Matt.
Yeah, so. I never do.
Any final thoughts? I mean, I'm going to always go in with an open mind to every album we do, but I don't think it's going to be hard to guess that I'm going to like all the Clash albums. It's right up there with Matt going to like the Beatles albums?
Yeah, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with these. Aren't really true cold listens for you.
No, certainly not. No. So... All right.
Scalding hot listens, cold takes from John.
There you
on
go.
The Clash.
Yeah, that's not my normal MO. So we'll see if I could do better here, because this was a first listen for me. We're gonna have you run the numbers in a second, Matt.